Do you know someone who always steps forward first? Before anyone asks, before the silence settles, before the discomfort becomes visible, they offer help automatically. At work, in friendships, in family, even with strangers. Most of us grow up believing this is the clearest sign of kindness, proof of a good heart, evidence of empathy. And sometimes that's true. But psychology rarely lives in clean explanations. When a behavior repeats itself across situations, across relationships, across years, it usually isn't just about generosity. It's about something deeper trying to resolve itself. I used to think perpetual helpers were simply wired differently, more compassionate, more selfless. Then I started paying attention to patterns. Who helped when they helped? What happened when their help wasn't needed? And how they reacted when it wasn't appreciated. That's when the picture became more complex. Because constant helping can be an expression of empathy, but it can also be a response to fear, uncertainty, or an unspoken need to feel secure in one's place. Some people help because they genuinely feel another person's distress as their own. Their nervous system reacts to suffering almost automatically. When someone else is overwhelmed, they feel unsettled until that discomfort is reduced. Helping brings relief not just to the other person, but internally. This is often rooted in emotional empathy, the capacity to resonate with another's feelings on a visceral level. It's not performative. It doesn't require recognition. It doesn't even require thanks. These helpers often disappear quietly once the situation stabilizes. But not all helping comes from this place. There is another form of empathy that looks similar on the surface, but functions differently underneath. Cognitive empathy allows someone to understand what another person needs without necessarily sharing their emotional state. This can drive very effective help, but it can also create distance. The helper knows what to do, steps in, solves the problem, and leaves. The interaction stays functional, not relational. In some cases, this kind of helping becomes a way to avoid emotional intimacy while still appearing deeply caring. Then there is compassionate empathy, which blends understanding, feeling, and action. This form of helping tends to respect timing, consent, and boundaries. It waits for cues. It adapts. It doesn't insist. Interestingly, perpetual helpers often struggle here. Not because they lack compassion, but because their help arrives before consent has been given, before vulnerability is expressed, before the other person has had a chance to decide what they need. That urgency tells us something. For some people, helping is tied to validation. Being useful becomes a way to feel valuable. Appreciation functions like emotional currency. Each thank you, each relieved smile, each expression of gratitude reinforces a quiet belief. I matter because I help. Without that feedback, the sense of worth feels unstable. This is where the so-called hero pattern begins to form. Not the dramatic rescuer seen in movies, but a subtler version. The one who steps in when others hesitate. The one who anticipates needs before they are spoken. The one who becomes indispensable. Over time, being needed becomes part of identity. When people rely on them, they feel secure. When they aren't needed, something inside them feels displaced. In environments that reward productivity and self-sacrifice, this pattern is often praised. The helper is seen as reliable, generous, strong. But internally, their self-worth is no longer intrinsic. It's negotiated through service. If help isn't requested, they may offer it anyway. If it's declined, they may feel rejected. Not because they wanted to control the situation, but because the offer itself was a bid for connection, relevance, or reassurance. Helping can also function as social strategy. Not always consciously. Offering assistance builds trust, visibility, and relational leverage. People remember who helped them. They feel indebted, even if they don't want to be. For some helpers, this creates a sense of safety in social systems. Helping becomes a way to anchor oneself within a group, to be known, to be remembered, to be included. This doesn't mean the help is fake. The intention may still be genuine. But the emotional reward isn't just seeing someone else benefit. It has the strengthening of social bonds that reduce the helper's own sense of isolation or uncertainty. Then there is control, a word that often feels uncomfortable to associate with kindness. But control doesn't always look domineering. Sometimes it looks like stepping in too quickly, fixing things before they unfold, offering solutions before emotions are fully expressed. For individuals who grew up in unpredictable environments, helping can become a way to manage anxiety. When things feel chaotic, taking action creates a sense of order. Helping restores a feeling of influence. It replaces helplessness with movement. The helper may not consciously want power over others, but they deeply want predictability. And helping creates that, at least temporarily. This is where the savior pattern casts a shadow. Help becomes intrusive. Advice is given without being asked. Support is offered in ways that subtly override another person's autonomy. The helper believes they are protecting, but they are also directing. They are shaping outcomes to avoid uncertainty. When their help is refused, it can trigger disproportionate discomfort, irritation, or withdrawal. Not because they were rejected personally, but because their primary coping mechanism was interrupted. There's also a quiet fear beneath constant helping, the fear of being unnecessary. For people who learned early on that love was conditional, that attention arrived only when they were useful, helping becomes a way to secure connection. If they are needed, they won't be abandoned. If they are helpful, they won't be ignored. This belief doesn't announce itself. It hides beneath generosity, but over time, it shapes behavior. The helper gives more than they have. They prioritize others' needs over their own. They struggle to rest without guilt. And eventually, the cost appears. Burnout rarely arrives suddenly for perpetual helpers. It accumulates quietly. Emotional fatigue, irritability, a sense of emptiness after giving too much for too long. They may feel resentful without understanding why. After all, helping was their choice. But resentment often emerges when giving is no longer aligned with capacity, or when expectations of appreciation go unmet. Many helpers never voice their exhaustion. They fear that saying no will change how others see them. They worry that withdrawing support will lead to rejection. So they continue, even as their internal resources deplete. The bitterness that follows isn't about others being ungrateful. It's about the helper having built their identity around giving without limits. There's a subtle grief here. The realization that being helpful didn't guarantee being cared for in return. That generosity did not ensure safety. That being needed is not the same as being known. A more balanced form of compassion begins with awareness, not judgment. Awareness of why help is offered and what it provides internally. When helping comes from clarity rather than compulsion, it feels different. There is space to pause, to notice whether the help is being requested or assumed, to distinguish between supporting someone and preventing them from engaging with their own capacity. True support doesn't rush to fix. It allows discomfort to exist. It respects another person's process. It offers presence without urgency. And perhaps most importantly, it allows the helper to remain human, not essential, not indispensable, but connected. There is also power in allowing oneself to receive help. For those who are always offering it, receiving can feel exposing. It disrupts the role they know how to play. But it also creates reciprocity. It reminds the nervous system that worth does not depend on usefulness. That connection doesn't require constant output. Helping others is not the problem. Constant helping without reflection is. When generosity becomes the only way to feel safe, seen, or valuable, it stops being free. It becomes a role. And roles are heavy things to carry over time. The psychology of the perpetual helper is not a flaw. It is a story. One shaped by experience, adaptation, and unmet needs. Understanding that story doesn't diminish kindness. It deepens it, because compassion that includes the self tends to last longer, feel lighter, and leave fewer invisible wounds behind. And sometimes, the most meaningful help is knowing when to step back, not because you don't care, but because care doesn't always need to take control to be real.